Hi, you're welcome back to my channel, and we're moving on now to having an understanding of the results you get when you put your work through Turnitin. And with respect to this, I'll be looking at three cases. The first one is going to be a case of an extremely high originality score. So the question here is, why is this score so high? What could be the reason? Is there anything else that can be done? And what are the consequences of having such, a high originality score? The first thing you want to ask yourself is, what exactly is Turnitin checking? When you hit that button where you submit your piece of coursework, what exactly does Turnitin do? Now, after you upload or submit your paper, your coursework or your essay, Turnitin starts matching your work or comparing your work with so many other work out there. So honestly, there is no hiding place. So it's checking student papers, it's checking the entire internet, it's checking journals, periodicals, publications, and depending on the way your lecturer has set it up, it could exclude bibliography, your references. It could also exclude quoted materials, and then it might be set up as well to exclude small matches. It all depends, but you should be aware it's checking student papers, internet sources, journals, periodicals, and publications across the entire internet. So that's why when you now get something like 98%, basically what it's saying is your work is matching student papers, periodicals, journal articles, or several other sources across the internet or textbooks. Now, this was an example of work I submitted some time back, and then it's returning 98%. We'll discuss why it's 98% next. The extreme high originality score could be as a result of high dependence on one or more sources. Okay, it could be actually that you've copied one source completely up to 98%, or you've used several sources and it has added up to 98% match to maybe student papers, to journal articles, and other sources out there. The submission matching could actually be that it's, picking up your own work. If you remember, I told you, I said, try not to submit twice within 24 hours. Because if you do that, then this is going to happen. If you make some minimal changes, then it's going to virtually match your work almost up to 100%. So there is a need to investigate before arriving at a conclusion what the reason is for such high originality score. Remember, 98% similarity. Now let's have a look at the submission, that's the report received from Turnitin. So this is an overview of the document from Turnitin Feedback Studio. Okay, so it shows you 98% here, and everything that is highlighted, it tells you exactly where it's picked from. So this is matching the third source that was found, and the match overview is what is going to be presented at this point. So when you click on there, you now have a clear overview of where the matches are coming from. So you see that 97% has matched an internet source, which is in this particular link. This is a journal site. Okay, so 97% of the submission has matched with one article in the site. That's not good, but it depends on what that means. Then 1% has matched with a student paper submitted to this destination, and then less than 1% has matched this internet source. So when 97% of the submission matches an internet source, it means that 97% of your work that you are submitting actually belongs to someone else or to another source. And then 1% matches a student paper. So another student has actually submitted 1% of your work, okay, before you submitted. So that is not yours originally. So basically this implies that 2% of your work is actually original to you, you know, based on this. But the question is this 97% yours? If it's yours, then we are now looking at things like self-plagiarism. Okay? So now, if you look at this, the earliest student that submitted was this same student. So that tells you it actually belongs to this student. So this submission in this journal site belongs to this student. So if the student tries to resubmit this piece of work for another coursework or another subject, another module, then it's now bordering on self-plagiarism or auto-plagiarism. And there are strict rules against that. So I cannot submit one piece of coursework twice. So if I've done an essay or written an essay for a subject and, you know, I got, say, 80%, and I was quite happy about that, as per 80% marks, that's a merit, a distinction, and then I have to write another essay in this area again for another module, I am not allowed to reuse the initial work I did. It's not allowed. And because I'm actually sharing on best practices and, you know, trying to help students avoid unintentional academic misconduct, then I will tell you, do not reuse your work twice for the purpose of credit. Okay? So if you look at this now, 97% actually belongs to the student that submitted. So it's not an issue. Okay? And then 1% belongs to someone else. So your lecturer is able to now click on this and understand who this 1% belongs to or where it was copied from. And basically that's how, you know, you're able to look at every single aspect of these sources and understand. For this particular submission, there are just 3 sources pulled up, so, which is not bad. And that's because, like I said, the initial 97 belongs to the student that submitted. And then 1% to another. Where it was submitted to is even clear. And your lecturer is able to actually click on this and request for this paper. Okay, so you need to know that, to be honest, there is really no hiding place. The third source, which is less than 1%, is from linkspringer.com. Again, you see the bits that was taken from here. And if you look at this closely, you see again, it's the same author. So it's the same paper that is being matching. If you remember, the initial submission of this particular work in my last video had an initial submission of 8% originality, okay? So a few changes were made and then the work was resubmitted. And then on resubmitting less than 24 hours, sorry, before the initial submission, it picked up 97% match with the site where the article was published. I hope this makes sense. So, reviewing case 1 again, a case of extremely high originality score could happen when you have copied and pasted too much from one source, a few sources or several sources, or you have resubmitted your work less than 24 hours after the last or initial submission. So try to avoid that. I mentioned that earlier. Try to avoid that. Or it could be a case of you reusing your work, like I explained before, which is called auto-plagiarism. Try not to reuse your work for different submissions. That is not allowed, and if it's picked up that you used your work in one module and you want to reuse it again in several other modules, then it can be counted against you. So recommendation is to allow 24 hours between your draft and your final submission time. In summary, now you can submit your work to Turnitin. You can also check the originality score. You understand what the number or the score means. And you also understand what auto-plagiarism or self-plagiarism means. So you should avoid that. Again, in summary, remember the initial submission of this work was 8%. Resubmitting in less than 24 hours led to a match of 98% with the site where the article was published. So try to avoid that. It was a match of 97%. Okay, and then there was 1% to the Springer site. Okay, so now You've looked at submitting your work to Turnitin, checking originality score, and we've started having a look at understanding the meaning of these originality scores. We've looked at the first case of an extremely high originality score. Stay tuned for the second and the third cases, after which we'll look at how you can actually edit and resubmit, where you are allowed resubmissions. Stay tuned.